The lecture hall buzzed with energy as students filed in, some clutching notebooks, others balancing coffee cups. It was just another Tuesday at Whitmore University, a prestigious campus nestled in the heart of Oregon. Inside room 302, a class on cultural criticism was about to begin, taught by none other than Professor Eleanor Grayson, a name that sparked admiration and controversy in equal measure. Known for her fearless critiques and unfiltered opinions, Grayson had a reputation for pushing boundaries, often using public figures as examples to dissect societal norms. Seated in the third row, blending into the sea of eager faces, was a young man few would have recognized, tall and poised, with a quiet demeanor that betrayed his keen observation. Barron Trump sat unnoticed, wearing a plain hoodie and jeans, keeping his head slightly down as if trying to avoid drawing attention. His presence wasn't a coincidence. Barron had enrolled in the university under an assumed name, hoping for anonymity despite his family's prominence. He craved a normal life, one where he could think for himself without the shadow of his last name looming over him. As students settled into their seats, Professor Grayson strode to the podium, her commanding presence silencing the murmurs almost immediately. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice crisp and confident. "Today we're diving into the concept of public image, how it's constructed, manipulated, and sometimes weaponized, and we'll be using some real-life examples." Barron shifted in his seat, his expression neutral. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he could already feel the weight of the moment. But what followed would shake the room and him in ways no one could have predicted. Professor Eleanor Grayson wasn't just a lecturer, she was a force of nature, with a doctorate from Stanford and a prolific career in cultural analysis. She had built a reputation for her fearless takedowns of societal hypocrisy, and her lectures often went viral, shared as both brilliant critiques and polarizing rants. Students packed her classes, eager for the intellectual fireworks she promised. Today seemed no different as Grayson began, weaving through examples of influential figures, deftly analyzing the contrast between their public personas and the realities lurking beneath. She was captivating, her words sharp and deliberate, yet it wasn't long before her tone shifted and she introduced a name that caught Barron's attention instantly. "Take Melania Trump, for instance," she said, pacing the stage with the confidence of someone completely in command. "A woman celebrated for her elegance and poise. Yet what does that say about our collective standards? Are we so shallow that beauty and silence become virtues worth celebrating?" A murmur rippled through the class, some nodding, others exchanging wary glances. Barron felt a subtle tightening in his chest, but kept his face impassive. Grayson continued, her words now dripping with sarcasm. "What about intelligence, contribution, influence through substance rather than surface? Is this truly the image we want to hold up for young women today?" Barron stared at the desk in front of him, his mind racing. He had attended the lecture out of genuine curiosity about the world of academia and intellectual discourse, but now he felt an unease creeping in. Not because he disagreed entirely with the concept, but because of how personal it felt. His classmates seemed entranced, some even chuckling at Grayson's quips. But for Barron, this wasn't just a lesson. It was a challenge. A line had been crossed, and he wasn't sure he could let it slide. Professor Grayson didn't stop there. She circled back to Melania Trump, dissecting her every move, from her choice of words during public speeches to her infamous jacket that read, "I really don't care, do you?" The students in the lecture hall leaned in, captivated by her razor-sharp commentary. "She's a symbol," Grayson declared, gesturing for emphasis. But a symbol of what? Of a bygone era when women were expected to stand silently behind powerful men, to smile prettily and say nothing of substance. Some students laughed, others murmured in agreement, the energy in the room growing charged as Grayson leaned harder into her critique. "It's fascinating," she added, her voice taking on a mocking edge, "how easily we mistake quietness for grace and compliance for class. What message are we sending to the next generation?" Barron's hands tightened into fists beneath the desk. The professor wasn't just criticizing a public figure, she was targeting his mother. For years, he had watched Melania endure judgment and ridicule, people seeing only her image, her past as a model, or her accent, and using it as fodder for their assumptions. But to him, she was more than that, a fiercely private, intelligent woman who had protected her family with quiet strength. Grayson's words felt like an attack, not just on his mother, but on the values she represented. What if she continued, her voice dripping with sarcasm? We celebrated women who actually made a difference instead of those who simply wore designer gowns. The class erupted in laughter this time, and Barron felt a sharp pang in his chest. He scanned the faces of his peers, some amused, others indifferent, but none seemed to question the one-sidedness of the argument. And yet, he stayed silent. For now, he wasn't sure if it was fear, respect for the professor, or the weight of being in an environment where his family name was likely unwelcome. But deep down, a spark of resolve began to burn. He wasn't sure if it was fear, respect for the professor, or the weight of being in an environment where his family name was likely unwelcome. But deep down, a spark of resolve began to burn. He took a deep breath, his hand steadying on the desk. Slowly, he raised his hand. It wasn't dramatic or rushed. It was calm, deliberate, almost as if time itself had slowed down. The professor paused mid-sentence, her gaze narrowing as she spotted him. "Yes?" she asked, her tone clipped as though annoyed by the interruption. Barron stood, his movements graceful but firm. The room fell silent, every pair of eyes turning toward him. The laughter had evaporated, replaced by a palpable curiosity. No one recognized him yet, but his commanding presence seemed to demand attention. "I think you're missing something important," he said, his voice steady, each word clear and deliberate. There was no anger in his tone, no defensive edge, just a quiet confidence that made everyone lean in a little closer. "You talk about my mother as if she's just an image, a caricature of what society wants her to be, but have you ever stopped to consider the humanity behind the headlines?" The room was utterly silent now, the weight of his words settling over the students like a heavy blanket. Even Grayson, known for her quick rebuttals, seemed momentarily stunned. "And let's not pretend," Barron continued, "that public figures like my mother don't pay a price for everything they do. Every smile, every gesture, every mistake is dissected, mocked, and judged by people who've never walked a day in their shoes. We're quick to tear people down, but slow to consider the cost of living under that microscope." The room was silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. And yet, as Barron's words began to flow, it became clear that he wasn't just defending his mother, he was redefining the entire conversation. Barron's voice carried through the room, steady but unyielding, as he spoke of his mother's journey, her strength, and her values. The professor blinked, caught off guard by the interruption. A few students exchanged glances, unsure of where this was going. But as his words began to flow, it became clear that Barron Trump wasn't just defending his mother, he was challenging the entire conversation. The room was silent, captivated by his unexpected depth, and for the first time, the students saw not just a classmate, but someone who carried the weight of experiences they could barely comprehend. Barron's voice never wavered, his gaze locked on Professor Grayson, as he spoke of the importance of fairness, compassion, and understanding. The lecture ended, but the energy in the room lingered like an aftershock. Students gathered their belongings slowly, whispering to each other as they replayed the exchange in their minds. For many, it was the first time they had seen someone challenge Professor Grayson in a way that didn't feel combative, but instead transformative. Barron quietly packed his bag, keeping his head down. A few students approached him hesitantly. "Hey, that was brave," one of them said, her voice tinged with admiration. "You really made me think differently about things." He smiled faintly, nodding in acknowledgement. He didn't say much. He wasn't there to bask in praise. His goal wasn't to win an argument. It was to shift the conversation. And judging by the hushed discussions around him, he had succeeded. Meanwhile, Professor Grayson remained at the podium, flipping through her notes, as if searching for something to ground her. A few students approached her with questions, but even she seemed less sure-footed than usual. The impact of the moment didn't stop at the classroom doors. Later that day, snippets of the exchange began circulating on social media. A student had recorded part of Barron's response and shared it online with T. He captioned, "When the quietest person in the room changes everything." Within hours, the clip gained traction, sparking debates in comment sections about respect, public perception, and the power of standing up for what you believe in. Across campus, students debated not just the subjects of their debates, but the way they approached them. Social media lit up with conversations about the importance of fairness and respect, even in criticism. For Barron, life went on quietly, just as he preferred. He returned to his studies, avoiding the spotlight as much as he could, but his actions had left an indelible mark. Without intending to, he had taught a lesson that transcended any lecture, a lesson about standing up for what you believe in, not with anger or defensiveness, but with grace and conviction. The story carried a powerful moral. In a world quick to judge and slow to understand, it takes courage to stand up for fairness and humanity. Respect doesn't diminish critical thought, it enhances it, reminding us that even in disagreement, we can choose compassion over mockery. As the semester unfolded, the students who witnessed that moment carried its message with them, and the ripple effect continued to spread far beyond Whitmore University.